And welcome to Access to Employment, a dialogue on inclusive workplaces featuring Royal National Institute of Blind People and Royal National Institute for Deaf People. Before we get going, I should mention that we've enabled captions for this webinar, which you can turn on by clicking on More, which for me is in the bottom right-hand side of the screen. I think it might be top right for some people. And if you click on there and click on captions, you should then be able to enable them. And also, just to describe the screen for those that can't see, there's a picture of Borough Yards where my office is based. The words Altum Consulting, which is my employer. Access to Employment, a dialogue on inclusive workplaces. Today's date and the Altum logo, which is 3 triangles, one yellow, one sky blue, and one navy blue. Thank you for everyone taking the time to join us today, and in particular to Dave and Terry from RNIB and RNID, whom I'll be introducing properly in a moment. I'm Robbie Anderson, Associate Director of the Charity Recruitment Team at Altum Consulting. We recruit finance professionals into the charity sector and are part of Altum Group, which recruits finance and transformation roles across a range of industries. As a member of our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, I and others on the committee noticed that there were gaps in our knowledge as to the experiences of people with sensory impairments, both when applying for jobs and when in employment. In the UK today, more than 12 million people are living with hearing loss, and concerns about employer attitudes towards hearing loss results in 54% of employees choosing not to tell their employer about their hearing difficulties, which further distances staff from the support they need to reach their potential. There are also 2 million people in the UK living with sight loss, and only 1 in 4 blind people of working age are in employment, and this figure has not changed within a generation despite the technological progress during this time. Meaningful employment can have a big impact on people's happiness and sense of purpose. Alongside this, as recruiters, we've noticed a skills shortage across many sectors and disciplines over the past few years. If we can do anything to remove barriers to employment, there are many benefits to job seekers, employers, and society as a whole. Our aim today is to provide a platform to these 2 great organisations to share experiences and tips that might help remove some of these barriers. First, we have Dave Williams, Customer Experience Manager for RNIB speaking, followed by Terry Devine, Associate Director for Inclusion and Employment at RNID. While there will be a fair amount of crossover between Dave and Terry, Dave will largely focus on the attraction and onboarding of new staff, while Terry will cover the development and retention of existing staff. We will finish with a Q&A session, so thank you to those who've already submitted questions, and please feel free throughout the webinar to continue to do so using the chat function. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Dave. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to be with you. I'm Dave Williams from RNIB, the UK's largest community of blind and partially sighted people. RNIB has 3 functions, essentially. One is as a service provider, retail and library services for blind and partially sighted individuals, sight loss support, and lots of other services besides. We also provide commercial services, so training and testing for our business customers. RNIB is also a campaigning organisation. We lobby government and we have been effective in that, many campaigns over the years, and we bring together the community. Sometimes the most important lessons that you need to learn as a blind or partially sighted person, you learn from other blind people. So RNIB aim to facilitate those connections. What I want to do is start with a little bit of a quiz to try and debunk myths around blindness, to really try to dig into some of the misconceptions that are out there. So grab yourself a pen or a notepad, or just open up the Notes app on your phone or tablet device, and I'm going to read out 6 statements about blindness, and I want you to note down whether you think each of these is true or false, and then at the end, tot up your score and see how you did. There are only 6, it won't take very long. And it's a little bit of fun. So, statement number 1, blind and partially sighted people have powerful hearing and other special senses to compensate. Statement number 2, for safety reasons, blind and partially sighted people and your colleagues require special assistance and supervision with many daily tasks, such as cutting food. So remember, for each of these, you're just writing down true or false. So number 3, blind and partially sighted employees can work as professional actors, doctors, and farmers. Is that true or false? Just write down your answer. Number 4, blind and partially sighted colleagues are always recognizable from their dark glasses, a white stick, or guide dog. Do you think that's true or false? Number 5, guide dogs rely on regular directions from their owners to reach their destinations. And finally, blind and partially sighted colleagues need to touch your face to find out what you look like. So hopefully you've got 6 answers that are true or false, and we'll go through now and you can give yourself a score out of 6. So statement number 1 is false. Blind people don't have extra senses. We develop our remaining senses. So it's not that my hearing is measurably better or that I've got a stronger sense of touch in any measurable sense. It essentially means that my visual cortex has been repurposed to make more use of those senses. It's not that in and of themselves they're any stronger. And if you're a comic book fan and you watch Daredevil, then we certainly don't have the superpowers of the blind assassin. Number 2, well, of course, when you first lose your eyesight, then yes, you will need assistance and supervision when learning to do potentially dangerous tasks like ironing or crossing the road or making a cup of tea. But once a blind person has been taught and trained how to do those things safely, then they happen every single day. There are thousands, tens of thousands of blind people making cups of tea, crossing roads, ironing shirts, cutting food up and down the country. So you don't need extra supervision to do those everyday tasks once you've had that rehabilitation process. Blind and partially sighted people can. So true for number 3. We can work as professional actors, doctors, and farmers. Anyone old enough to remember Columbo? He had a false eye. And there are doctors, people working in the medical profession, psychologists, psychiatrists, there are even partially sighted GPs. You'll see in a moment, I'm going to show you a picture of a blind barrister and a blind MP. And of course, we had a partially sighted Prime Minister. Anyone know who that was? Of course, it was Gordon Brown. He was partially sighted. So number 3 is true. So blind people work in lots of different fields, but as you heard from Robbie, 3/4 of working age blind and partially sighted people are currently not in a job. Number 4, then, blind and partially sighted people, are they always recognizable in those ways? The answer, of course, no. There are lots of other ways you might recognize a blind person. Maybe you can think of some of them. Maybe somebody doesn't make eye contact. Maybe somebody's being guided. But, the elephant in the room, you just might not know. So a lot of sight loss goes unreported. Not everybody volunteers that information. So the signs may be more subtle, but you may just not be aware. Dark glasses, by the way, sometimes for modesty reasons, sometimes because photophobia can be really uncomfortable. Even blind people sometimes struggle with discomfort caused by bright light. A white cane surveys the ground in front of me, so I can feel obstacles in my environment, as well as signaling to other people that I can't see. And a guide dog, well, we'll learn about guide dogs now. Number 5, guide dogs rely on regular directions from their owners to reach their destinations. That is, in fact, true. The guide dog doesn't know what's on your calendar or which shop you plan to go to. Clearly, if you repeat the same route every day, the dog may anticipate it, but a dog is rewarded for stopping at curbs, finding doorways, and taking you around obstacles. So do not interfere with the dog. I will be talking a bit more about that later on, but if you encounter an assistance dog in the workplace, please try to avoid stroking it. It's very distracting to be stroked at work. And finally, number 6, blind and partially sighted colleagues do not need to touch your face to find out what you look like. If I want to know what you look like, I will ask a trusted friend, because you might not give me an accurate representation of yourself, and I definitely don't want to touch your face. So I will ask somebody who's a third party, somebody's opinion I trust on that. So add up your answers. Let us know how you did. and hopefully it's the ensuing conversation that will equip you with the ability to call out those myths and misconceptions should you encounter them in the future. Let's talk about inclusion then. What does inclusion mean to you, particularly in a work context? Does it mean treating all employees exactly the same? Does that work when you treat all employees exactly the same? No, of course it doesn't. Inclusion is about giving all employees equitable opportunities to contribute, to be part of the team, to be part of the solution, to work their best working life, to really utilize their skills. Inclusion isn't just about making sure that, everybody gets a comfy chair or everybody, gets information in audio, because they might not need it, right? So it's about making sure that everybody can reach their potential. And why is it important? Well, there are three main reasons why inclusion is important in the workplace. Firstly, you have a legal obligation under the Equality Act 2010. You can't discriminate against people on the grounds of disability. Disability is a protected characteristic. There's also of course, the moral argument. You'd like to think that if you lost your eyesight, that you would be able to continue in a job. Would you want to lose your job if you lost your eyesight, or would you like to think that your employer would support you? Terry's going to be talking a bit more about retaining colleagues who acquire disabilities later on. And then, of course, there's the business incentive, the purple pound, which is worth tens of billions of pounds every year. So having blind and partially sighted colleagues will give you greater customer insight, because, of course, not all your customers are able-bodied. 1 in 5 people has a disability. So it makes business sense to keep hold of a diverse workforce, which will make you more creative and more resilient as an organization. So how do we become inclusive? Well, the first thing, of course, is our attitude about having an open mind, trying to see the person rather than the sight loss, trying to see what somebody brings to the table rather than focusing only on their disability. So genuinely having an open mind from the top down within organizations. Go and find out about the Valuable 500, an incredible organization of business leaders who are really committed to inclusion. And there is, of course, the skills, right? Knowing how to put information into accessible formats. It's easier than you think. In Microsoft Office, you've got an accessibility checker. So if you just search the ribbon for accessibility, you will find that there. There are skills, of course, to do with guiding. You lead somebody with your elbow or your shoulder, and not everybody wants to be guided. So just asking, those communication skills, super important. And then the knowledge, right? You don't have to know everything as employers. There are lots of resources, and we're going to be signposting to them in this session. And there are our pictures of hands with lots of different colors. So let's talk about some of the benefits then for you as an employer. And I've already touched on some of these. Of course, as disabled people, we are forced to be more creative every single day, because we need to approach what is essentially an able-bodied world and find ways around doing things. So we bring a degree of creativity that might not already be within your teams. And the same is true for problem solving. So if the business is facing a problem, often by having different perspectives, if you only ever recruit people like you, then you will only ever have the same problems and the same solutions. Loyalty as well. You heard the stats at the beginning about, how many blind people of working age are not in employment. And so when we get a job, my goodness, do we do everything we possibly can to hang on to that job. And, my last job, I was there for 9 years. So we are very loyal as employees. And of course, we do bring you that customer insight and resilience and access to the purple pound that we talked about. And of course, we know the brands that we relate to, and those are the ones we recommend, and those are the ones we want to buy from. And of course, when organizations are not inclusive, somebody has a bad experience, that's going to spread like wildfire these days. We've all got access to social media, including those of us who are blind and partially sighted. And there's our blind barrister and our blind MP from Battersea. Okay, so my career, really, my background is in assistive technology and community media. So I've worked for companies that make braille and screen reading products that enable blind and partially sighted people to work, learn, and be independent. I've also done a bit of radio as well. Got the perfect face for radio. I've made packages for BBC Radio 4, and outside of RNIB, I chair a Braille charity called Braille's Foundation, who are committed to spreading tactile literacy. And that's not least because when I became a parent, my son was sighted, but I didn't hold that against him. But I did want to read him the bedtime story. And my wife is also blind, so I couldn't find a better tool for doing that other than Braille. You know, as wonderful as audiobook narrators are, I want to do the silly voices. I want to read We're Going on a Bear Hunt and, you know, Thomas the Tank Engine and all of that. I also do a bit of running as well. It says I'm a marathoner. Well, I've run 9, going to Chicago in a couple of weeks to hopefully run my 10th marathon. And I play piano in a blues band. And the reason I share those things with you is because not only are they good for my physical and mental health, but also good for my social health, as is employment. And once we get past the fact that, oh, it's a blind runner or it's a blind piano player, actually, you're just a runner. You're just a piano player. And it's the same in the workplace, that when you've come to do a job of work, yes, of course, initially, there are going to be things that need to be figured out. How are we going to make this work? But once you've solved those problems, those blind colleagues can contribute as much, if not more, than your able-bodied colleagues. I've got a rare genetic eye condition called Leber's congenital amaurosis. It was a clash in 2 recessive genes in my parents. So both my parents are sighted. And in a practical sense, it's a bit like looking into a bucket. You know, I've got no central vision, but I do have a little bit of peripheral light perception. I've got a blind friend who describes his eyesight as a bit like looking through a bathroom window on a rainy day. If you've met a blind person, you've met one blind person. Everybody sees differently, and some of us are more affected or otherwise by environmental factors. So things like bright light can be problematic. Distance, position, color. Lots of environmental factors can influence how much somebody can see. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a debate on social media about a picture of a dress and what color was that dress. I've been in the room with 2 sighted people looking out of the same window, and they can't agree whether it's raining. So actually, do any of us really see in the same way? So obviously growing up, I was very aware of social, emotional attitudes, fears and misconceptions. That's why I wanted to share some of those misconceptions in our quiz earlier on. You know, some kids were scared of my sight loss, and I was scared that I wouldn't amount to very much as an adult because I had pretty low expectations, and they're the real killer. You know, it's those attitudinal barriers, those low expectations. They are the thing that hold people back from reaching their potential. Well, of course, I have access to all sorts of information and communication tools. I use screen reading software that speaks what's on my computer screen, but also gives me extra commands and tools for navigating and searching and reordering information to make sure that it works in a way that I can make sense of. So on your own device, take some time to go into settings and go to accessibility and discover the rich set of screen reading and screen magnification tools that are available to you there. Braille I've already talked about. Of course, haptic feedback, increasingly we're making use of that, where your device vibrates to signal something. And blind people now are making increasing use of artificial intelligence and remote visual interpreter services so that we can get sighted assistance with everyday tasks. And there is a professional service called Aira, A-I-R-A, and Aira will enable a blind person to complete a visual task by connecting connecting you with a sighted PA, and there are funding available for these things. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But of course, as wonderful as technology is, it doesn't replace those core independent skills. So if you know somebody who's changing has got changes in their eyesight, they need to learn how they're going to do mobility safely, and how are they going to access information. What are the kind of the core things that you really need to do to get on with the rest of your life. So what can you do when thinking about recruitment? Well, of course, any employment journey starts with a job advert. It's that awareness piece. And does your job advert signal that your organization welcomes opportunities and welcomes disabled applicants? Do you communicate that? Do you have anything to show in your job advert that actually you would like to hear from disabled people? Because some employers do, some employers don't. And of course, if I'm looking for a job, I'm going to be looking for the employers that actually are inviting or encouraging people from a diverse mix of backgrounds. And then what about the application form? How accessible is that? Have you tested it with screen reading software or screen magnification software? And the interview panel, is that all able-bodied, middle-aged white people, or actually is the interview panel representative of a more diverse workforce, and does that interview panel bring any experience of disability to the table, so that they might have some empathy with the potential candidate? And don't forget, of course, the interview isn't the only way of getting somebody into a job. Work experience, apprenticeships, and other schemes give disabled people a fantastic opportunity to really show you what we can do and what we are capable of when we get that opportunity. Sometimes, a 20-minute job interview might not necessarily show a disabled person in their best light. So what is your induction process? What's your onboarding process? What training do you need to do when you start in your organization? How accessible is that? Well, RNIB can help you with that. We can help you test that journey to make sure that all those things are accessible. And if you have disabled employees already, do you have a mentor scheme? So if anybody new with a disability is joining the organization, who can they go to? Who can they turn to? Who's going to give them the support to help them navigate that world? So having mentors at work can also be hugely helpful. Let's talk about money. The government has an incredible scheme called Access to Work. And this is a fund that will cover any additional costs that you as an employer may have when recruiting a disabled person. So they will pay for any specialist equipment. For example, I've got a Braille device, and that was funded by the Access to Work funds. This is a government fund. So once somebody's had a job offer and accepted that job offer, they could apply for this funding, and it will help with the cost of specialist equipment. It will also help with the cost of human support as well. So if I needed a PA to work with me on visual aspects of my job, or to accompany me to certain types of events, then Access to Work can help cover those costs as well. Same with travel to and from work. If you're on a difficult industrial estate that maybe there isn't buses or whatever, and there are no pavements, then Access to Work can help cover the cost of taxis to get me to and from the office. And if you need to make physical adaptations to the office, then funding is available for that, as is training. I've delivered training for organizations where they've had a colleague lose their eyesight, and part of the Access to Work assessment has said, actually, do you know what? Let's give all the colleagues Understanding Sight Loss for Business awareness training. So that's an option as well. So you can learn more about all of that and much more over on rnib.org.uk/employment. So thinking about how blind people access information, obviously magnification is a big one. So if you remember, I said go to settings, accessibility on your device, switch on the magnification, and just have a little bit of a read of a document. See what that's like when you go on the web. Try your company website. Try applying for a job at your own organization using some of these accessibility tools, and see what that experience is like. And then come to RNIB and we'll help you fix it if there is a problem. The important thing to know know about the magnification, of course, is that the area of the screen that you see, that's called the viewport, and not everything fits inside the viewport. So there's other information on screen that may not be visible immediately to somebody using magnification. So it may take somebody longer using magnification. They may become more fatigued. They may need more breaks using magnification. But actually, with experience, it is possible to become super efficient and to use some of the more advanced settings of magnification to hook certain areas of the screen. Maybe you've got a complex spreadsheet, for example, and you need to keep an eye on the bottom line. It is possible to do things like split screen so that the current cell is magnified at the top of the screen, say, and then the bottom line might be magnified further down. So the first impression is not necessarily the only experience possible. With proper training, using screen magnification and screen reading actually can be very efficient. And learning to use a screen reader, it's a bit like giving somebody a car, right? You wouldn't just give somebody a car and expect them to know how to drive it or use it. And the same is true with a screen reader, right? Yes, it says what's on the screen, but it's very selective about that. It tries to only tell you the key information, and it also gives you those tools for navigating and reordering content so that you can make sense of it. Also, there are specialist apps from third parties available. Microsoft make a great app called Seeing AI, which tries to use artificial intelligence to speak text and describe objects in the physical environment. Ira, the remote video assistance service, I already mentioned. So, look, start by exploring the accessibility settings that are in your own device. That's a great place that you can start building awareness. And if you add /accessibility onto any big tech company's web address, then you'll find more information about the accessibility features of Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and so on. So when communicating, generally, it's okay to use the same language as everybody else. Did you see the match? Look out, I'll see you next week. That's just how people speak, you know, and occasionally you might find the odd blind person who is offended by that. But for the most part, it's how we speak as well. So it's okay to use visual language, but please try to remember to describe visual elements. So if you are delivering a presentation and there's a visual kind of component to that, just mention it. You know, just because a picture says 1,000 words, actually 2 or 3 well-chosen words will do, you know, and will help bring that to life. If I ask you where the bin is and you say, well, over there, Dave, well, over there doesn't really tell me very much. My favorite is you can't miss it, because I usually do. So encourage a team culture where accessibility is the norm and the expectation, because most disability is acquired and could affect anybody at any time. And if an important colleague of yours was to lose their eyesight, you wouldn't want to lose their expertise and skills, would you? So very important that we all make it our business. Make accessibility part of your team meetings and part of your internal communications. So inclusion isn't something that we tick off late on a Thursday afternoon. It's something that we've got to do all day, every day. Modern organizations have to think about GDPR, have to think about safeguarding, and I would put accessibility and inclusion on that list. So share your successes, share your challenges, and feel good about accessibility, because it is everybody's business. There is a kite mark, a sort of a badge that you can get as an employer that can help you signal that you are an organization that is able to recruit and get the best out of blind and partially sighted employees. It's called Visibly Better. There's currently 11,000 blind and partially sighted people actively looking for work in the UK. Could your business reach the Visibly Better standard? Well, do pop over to that website address again, rnib.org.uk/employment, and look into the Visibly Better scheme. So to bring my section to a close, I've got a little bit of a list of everyday things that you can do to help both in and out of the workplace. Think about your written communication. Do you only communicate in tiny print and hard copy, or actually are there other accessible ways in which you could be communicating? Often if you create an accessible digital document, I mentioned the checker in Word, the accessibility checker. There's also a great resource called Sculpt for Accessibility, SCULPT, Sculpt for Accessibility. That's a 6-point checklist that can help you get started with making accessible digital content. Ask your colleagues what their preferred format is, and make sure that you apply those requests to training materials and other documents that they might need to access. Learn how to sighted guide. There's a wonderful video on YouTube, How to Guide a Blind Person, presented by Amar Latif. You may recognize him from MasterChef from a couple of years ago. He's a TV presenter, has his own Travelize company, so he's also an entrepreneur, and he's made a short video. It runs about 9 minutes, and it's beautifully produced, and it shows you exactly how you would go about guiding a blind person, and also practice those descriptive skills. Get into pairs. Maybe one of you have an object and ask the other person to describe it, and see if you can figure out which bits they missed. And if you do that in the round, so that everyone can hear everyone else's pair, then actually by the time you get to the third pair, the descriptive skills have really gone through the roof. And that reminder, don't forget, assistance dogs, they are working dogs. They're trying to do a job. And I don't know about you, but I would find it very distracting to be stroked at work. So try to avoid interacting with guide dogs when they are working. Speak to the owner first before you speak to the dog. So inclusive employers enable everyone to reach their potential, not just blind and partially sighted people. Learn more at rnib.org.uk/employment. Thank you so much for your time and attention this afternoon.
Thank you, Dave. Very informative and well presented. Over to you, Terry.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to meet you all. I'm Terry Devine, and I'm the Associate Director for Inclusion and Employment at RNID. I'll tell you a bit about myself first. So I've been with RNID for 22 years now, in a variety of roles, coming from interpreter training right through to running an employment and benefit service. I'm what you call a CODA, so I'm a child of deaf adults. Sign language is my first language, so I grew up signing first before I could speak, as both parents were profoundly deaf. I'm also a member of the BSL Advisory Board at the UK government, so BSL is a big part of my everyday working life. So we've moved on to the next slide, and the picture on the slide, no, you've jumped back to that one, thank you. So the picture on this slide, there's 4 pictures. There's the RNID logo, and we're supporting people who are deaf, have hearing loss or tinnitus. There's a small picture which demonstrates our information line. There's one which looks like a mobile phone that shows our online hearing check. There's a picture of a biomedical scientist, and then there's a cartoon picture about campaigning for change. So RNID is a digital first charity, and we do as much as we can online, although we do have a face-to-face service across the UK. We have 4 main programmes, which are inclusion, which is one of mine, and employment is one of mine. So the inclusion programme is about ensuring that our communities have the support and equal access to information, spaces and services as anyone else. So they want the same support, but they can get access. And it's based on the social model of disability, where we look at the barriers. It's barriers that actually disable people from being totally included in society. So whether it's physical barriers, so things like ramps or accessible lifts and things like that, to attitudinal barriers, which tends to be the thing that most employers have, is an attitudinal barrier, thinking that people with a disability aren't able to do a job. They make that decision for them, and say they can't do the job. So the employment programme is about working to ensure our communities have equal access to reward and employment opportunities. We work with employers to make sure they better understand how to successfully recruit people into their organisations and support individuals to excel when they get there. Our third programme is health, where we work to identify improvements in audiology pathways and actually in general to access health at all. So things like if a BSL user has to go for a health appointment and there's no interpreters there, it's about working with the NHS to make sure that they are fully accessible and that the information they provide is accessible as well. We do have an online hearing check, which only takes a couple of minutes. So if you haven't done it, please do it, because it can help you identify if you do have a hearing loss. And at the moment, we have had over 250,000 people have taken the check in the last year. You know, it doesn't tell you you've got a hearing loss, but it will tell you if you should go and see your GP to get checked. And then our fourth programme, which is last but not least, is our biomedical research. So we are the only provider or charity in the UK that do biomedical research around hearing loss. We work with a lot of the universities, a lot of the students, and we look at the reasons for hearing loss and how can we prevent it from happening, and how can we possibly look at cures as well. We want to find solutions for people that have got hearing loss. Not everybody wants a solution, because the cultural model of disability, a lot of sign language users don't actually want a cure. They're quite happy. They see themselves as a linguistic minority. So I'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide's got 4 cloud pictures on it. One is a picture of 3 characters, and it's about deaf people and people with hearing loss are less likely to be employed. So it's to demonstrate those characters. Then there's 2 signing hands in another cloud, and only 37% of people who report BSL as their main language are working, in comparison to 77% of the general population who are not disabled under the Equality Act. Now, that is a 40% difference between the two, which is a huge amount of people that aren't working that use BSL. The third picture is a cochlear implant. It's a cartoon picture of a cochlear implant, and saying that people with hearing loss use a variety of communication methods. And the fourth picture is just an ear, saying that hearing loss and deafness are a contributor to people deciding to retire early. So if you think about the people who are your customers, not just your customers, and your staff at the moment, so 1 in 5 of your customers has potentially got a hearing loss. There are 12 million people across the UK with a hearing loss. Yes, a lot of them are age-related. There's a rule of thumb that once you get over 50%, it's roughly 50% of people. Once you get to 70%, it's 70% of people will have some level of hearing loss. Now, if you think about the working age of the population, and we're all having to work longer, retirement age for some people isn't until 70 now. So there's likely that population of people, as we move along, there'll be more and more older people actually in work and might have a significant hearing loss in the workplace. And you might want to keep that staff because they've been trained through the years and they will have a lot of skills and experience that you want to keep. But people delay in taking action on their hearing loss, and they don't look after their hearing the same way as you do with your eyes and your teeth. We all quite comfortably go to the dentist. Well, some of us do. Or you'll go and get your eyes checked quite readily. But people do not get their hearing checks. And yet wear and tear is the same on your ears as it is on your eyes and your teeth. So people should actually do that as a regular checkup. So thinking about people around communication, if we're talking about the box on communication, deaf people have different ways of communicating, and it's like Dave said about visual loss. Everybody's different, everybody's individual, and they have their own way of communicating. So at RNID, we actually have a card online that people can download to say, this is my favourite way of communicating. So you can do that on the RNID website. Hearing loss is very individual. People might use lip reading, but it can be quite exhausting. So you get a thing called hearing fatigue. And lip reading actually only picks up at the maximum 40% of the conversation. People need to be quite experienced. So you use other tools to enhance the lip reading as well. So as you can imagine, it can be quite tiring to do it. You can get hearing aids and basic communication skills, like there's a rule of thumb that we call ear. So think about the environment. Is it well lit? Can you actually see the people? Deaf people need to see your face to be able to lip read you. Think about what you're saying. If you're using complex language, so you repeat it. So the R for ear stands for repeat. So you can rephrase it or repeat it if they don't actually understand what you're saying. And then EAR, and I've missed out the A, and it's about getting attention. So getting attention is simply just tapping somebody on the shoulder or waving your hand in front of their face to make sure that you're looking at them so they know that you're talking to them. So there's very simple things you can do to communicate with people. Everybody tends to think of deaf people as using sign language. And there's only 87,000 people in the UK use sign language, are actual sign language users, and not all of them are deaf. So for somebody like me, who's a coder, I use sign language on a daily basis, but I am not deaf. And one of the things to understand about sign language is that it is a language in its own right. It was recognised in 2022 as a language. It has its own structure, syntax, and grammar. It doesn't have a register, so it's quite different from English. And the actual translation, you might think it's English, but it's not. The syntax is completely different from English. It's more like Chinese than it is English. So consequently, people who use BSL as their first language may not have the best literacy skills. So it's quite common for them to have poor literacy because they get poor educational experiences as well. And quite often, they will come out of school with a reading age of 9. And one of the recent pieces of research we've found is that children with cochlear implants, because there's an assumption that they can actually hear, they don't get the same levels of support in school as children who use sign language. So children who use sign language actually get better attainment levels than children who use cochlear implants. And consequently, that has an impact on their working experience in the future. And so obviously for skills and training. And one of the other things that you might be interested in is that there is a correlation between hearing loss and dementia. And as the working population gets older, obviously there's going to be more people within the population who will get dementia. And if you treat your hearing loss earlier, it actually delays the onset of dementia. So it's one reason for getting a hearing check. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So the next slide has a picture of our research report, Hearing Loss at Work, and it's about employer insights. So we did some research in 2023 about hearing loss at work to shed light on how hearing loss is perceived in the workplace, both by operational managers and by senior leaders. And to do this, we did some social research with senior managers, operational managers, and we had some roundtables where we got very senior people to sit around and talk to us about the issues in the workplace. And from the insights, we've been able to identify key gaps in knowledge and understanding and develop digital resources to address these gaps. So if you go onto the RNID website, there is lots of information there that can support you as a manager on how to manage deaf staff. But one of the biggest issues that we find is the lack of disclosure in the workplace. And that makes it really difficult to address. We know there's about 12 million people with hearing loss across the UK, but we cannot tell you exactly how many people are in work that have a hearing loss, simply because not everybody wants to declare a hearing loss in the workplace. They don't feel confident about doing it. And that comes from the top down. So we want to empower people, those with hearing loss and tinnitus, to succeed in employment. So therefore, we want them to be able to tell their managers that they do have a hearing loss. And it's important that senior managers actually role model the fact that they might have a hearing loss. It's important for them to come out and say to their staff, actually, look where I am, I may be a chief exec and I've actually got a hearing loss. We've got several sort of ambassadors at very senior level who will happily come and talk to people to say about their experience working at that level with a hearing loss. And the sort of things that they can put into place to manage their work situation. There's also the lack of confidence with line managers about managing somebody in the workplace who has a hearing loss. And organisations need a whole range of support, and this is what came out in the report to say that in order to support staff, they need this support to get advice and guidance from organisations like yourself and like RNIB for somebody with a visual loss. Go to the experts and they will quite happily give you advice on how to support staff in the workplace. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. I'm quickly touching on recruitment here, even though I'm looking at retention and development and work. And the reason I'm doing this is specifically around hearing loss, the things that you need to think about. So it's a cloud picture with somebody with their hand up against their ear. And it's about making sure that your job adverts are suitable for prospective clients, right? Think about who you want to target to champion equality and diversity in the workplace, and displaying your disability confident badge if you have the disability confident badge. And if not, we would advise that you actually go and try and get it, because it then makes you an accessible employer. For people who are deaf or have hearing loss, plain English is a big thing. It's useful for everybody, because you have a lot of people with English as a second language, and to use plain English, then that gives access to everybody. It's not just for sign language users, it's helpful across the board. Offering different ways of actually accessing your organisation, it's just not by telephone, because a lot of people with the hearing loss obviously can't use the telephone. So think about how people get access to you. Can they use an email? Do they have other routes that they can access you? So they might use a VRS service, for instance. So similar to what Dave was talking about, the remote video assistance service, deaf people can use a video relay service where they can get interpreters to contact you. So there's different ways of communication. Learn about the different types of communication support and how you can book them. So if you've got somebody coming in for an interview, ask them what reasonable adjustments they need. Ask them if they need communication support. And there are different types. Not everybody uses a sign language interpreter. There are things, people provide communication services like electronic note takers, who will come in and type verbatim what you've actually been saying in the meeting, so that the deaf person can read in front of them what's been said. So there's different types of communication support, and you might want to think about what you use. In the interview, as I mentioned earlier, think about ear. So it's about the environment. How light is the environment? Can the person see your face? There's no point in having the light on the person that's getting interviewed. They need to be able to see the interviewer's face. So have a think about that. And have a place where you've got soft furnishings, because noise bounces about the room, and you want it to be as quiet as possible in that room for people to be able to understand what you're saying as well. There's a rule of thumb when you're working with deaf people, is that you speak one person at a time as well. So having a conversation, group conversations can be very difficult for deaf people. So please speak one at a time. If you're using an interpreter, then you speak to the person you're interviewing and not the interpreter. The interpreter there is there to do communication for both of you. It's not just for the deaf person, it's for you as well, because they will translate what's been said by the deaf person to you. So it's about joint communication between you and the deaf person. There's also a number of specialist agencies that recruit staff, or can help you recruit staff with disabilities as well, that are out there. So you might want to focus on them. I'm not stealing thunder from the Altum group, because I'm sure they would want to do that as well. But there are some specialist agencies out there that can help you do that. Can I move on to the next slide, please? So we're looking at retention of staff. As I mentioned earlier, hearing loss and deafness are a contributor to people leaving work early. Simply because they start losing the ability to hear what's going on in the office. They'll become more socially isolated because they stop that water cooler conversation. What was on telly last night, and talk about that, or talking about the football if you watch the football. And people have the conversation around the water cooler or making a coffee, and deaf people start losing out on that conversation, because if they don't know what the topic of conversation is, they can't join in. And as I say, group situations can be very difficult, and therefore they become more and more socially isolated. So good culture within your organisation is to make sure they're included, because that's a big part of your work as well, is to make sure that people are actually included in those conversations. The social conversations is a big part of it. And consequently, when people start becoming deaf in work, what we've found is that 39% of business leaders have told us they don't feel comfortable in supporting staff with a hearing loss to stay in work. And 54% of people have told us that they're not comfortable to tell their employers that they've actually got a hearing loss. So that then becomes more complicated to manage. It means that the deaf person, or the person that's got the hearing loss, then starts to lose instruction from the managers because they're not picking it all up, and that might affect their performance. They might actually get, not do their job as well as what they would do if they knew everything that was expected of them. Their managers then might start getting a bit frustrated because they're not doing their job as well. So it's about good communication and making sure that as an organisation, you do have a culture where you're open and honest about these conversations. And there's a number of things that you can do to address that. And if you think about the people that have been there for a long time and are leaving, you're losing major skills and experience that you've invested in as an employer. You know, you've provided training and support to that member of staff, and then just because they've started losing their hearing and they might be needing a bit of extra support, they might feel, actually, I'm really struggling here. I'm just going to leave now. I'm just going to retire early, which is what we're finding a lot of people are doing. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot more people are having to stay and work longer because of the pension age being changed to 70 for some people. And if you think about the rule of thumb, older people, there's more and more older people in the population, and therefore more and more people will have a hearing loss. And you will be losing all those skills and some corporate memory as well, which we're finding as an organisation, or people who have been with the organisation a lot longer are now leaving. We're losing some of the corporate memory, which is really important to employers and corporations and businesses. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Retaining staff. So make sure support systems are in place, that you've got things like, and the picture is a picture of a man who is obviously a member of staff. So make sure that your staff are aware of support systems that are in place. So get employee assistance programs that your staff can contact for extra support. So if they are starting to lose their hearing, they might feel more comfortable about going to an employee assistance program before they come and talk to their manager. Look at reasonable adjustments in the workplace and make it known, make it a culture in your organisation that you're quite comfortable putting in the adjustments. Give staff opportunities to talk about hearing loss, you know, if they've got a hearing loss. So think about, there's particular days through the year. So like March has World Hearing Loss Day. So you might want to do an activity with your staff. If you've got a team that does that sort of thing, they might want to do an activity with the staff around World Hearing Loss Day and provide information on that. Or there's Deaf Awareness Week in May, you might want to do events around that. And that way it starts producing this culture in the organisation where you're quite happy to talk about hearing loss, you know, and that staff might start opening up about it. Think about access to development and progression opportunities. You know, is your training and development fully accessible? So whether it's you that provides the training and development or an external provider, is it fully accessible? And create an accessible and inclusive culture, as I said, in the working environment. And that comes down to about your policies. It comes down to your procedures. Think about if somebody needs time off sick for treatments and things like that. Does your procedures allow that? Does your procedure allow for somebody with a disability to get extra time off? It might be a short-term disability. It might be something like cancer treatment. So does your policies and procedures allow for all those sort of things? Can I move on to the next slide, please? So as we said, development of staff is about access to inclusive employment, but it doesn't just stop at recruiting and onboarding. So one of the things that we recommend is an adjustment passport, and some of you might have heard of it, some of you might not have. So what is an adjustment passport? So it's a tool that employers can offer, and it's your member of staff that actually completes it. So passports have a lot of functions. They can support a conversation between the employee and the line manager about a disability, a health condition, might even be gender reassignment and any workplace adjustments that need to be made. It acts as a record of the conversation and of the adjustments agreed. It acts as a record of adjustment made for individuals as supportive measures. So it might be things like, Dave spoke about access to work is one of the things that we use quite a lot, and it's the biggest secret in the world. DWP don't tell you about it. And they will pay for BSL interpreters if somebody needs a BSL interpreter at work. They pay 100% of it. So they do an assessment. You can get a workplace assessment done. RNID provide those if you need one. And you can get a workplace assessment done where they will work with the member of staff and say, right, okay, when do you need a BSL interpreter? So it might be for a team meeting situation. You know, it might be for some translation of documents, and you then apply to access to work and they'll give you a set number of hours. And in your adjustment passport, you would record all that detail, saying this is the agreement that we've got with Access to Work and when it's up for review. And the good thing about the adjustment passport is that it's between the member of staff and the line manager, and you should review it on a regular basis, like when you have one-to-ones, and say, are you as an organisation providing the right support? And are they able to do their job with the support that they're getting? It also allows you the opportunity to then say, how do you want someone to talk about your disability if you're off work for a particular reason for that disability? So, for example, mental health is one of the ones that can be quite sensitive for individuals. They might feel that they don't want to openly tell all their colleagues they've got a mental health issue, but they're taking time off work for it. So what does their manager say to their colleagues? Saying, oh, Joe's off work because he's bipolar. Joe might not be quite comfortable with you saying that he's bipolar. So there's that conversation between the member of staff and the manager to say, this is how I want you to describe when I'm off work. You know, and that way the member of staff feels much more comfortable in talking. And they might be quite open with their colleagues to tell them things, but a lot of people don't, and they want to keep it confidential. So the adjustment passport helps you to record all these things, and it lets you have that conversation about, you know, what you want to do and what the manager needs to do. It's completely voluntary. Not all members of staff will want to do it, but RNID as an organisation, we use it, and it helps protect the member of staff to make sure that you've put adjustments into place and that you're providing the support the member of staff needs, but it also helps the organisation to prove that you've actually done that. So I hate to say it, but if you ever get to a tribunal situation, it's a very useful document to use. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Right, so technology obviously drives a lot of stuff in the workplace, and hearing loss is no different from people with a sight loss. There's a lot of tech out there that we can use. There's 3 pictures on this. That's clouds, one with a cochlear implant. The second one demonstrates a loop, a hearing loop. And the third one is figures that's supposed to demonstrate video conferencing. So technology is a big thing that you can use in the workplace. And the first picture is around hearing aids and cochlear implants. There are a number of different types of hearing aids. So you can get behind the ear hearing aids, in the ear canal hearing aids, bi-cross hearing aids, invisible and canal hearing aids. So there's a whole range, and you get open fit and then you get molds as well. So they come in all types and sizes because people's hearing loss is so different. So the right one, you actually have to go and talk to an audiologist, and they'll recommend the best type of hearing aid for you. So it's based on the type of your hearing loss as well. Generally, people would really like discrete ones, but the discrete ones, the processor's much smaller, so it's for a mild hearing loss. And the bigger hearing aids that you get is because the processors are bigger and you've got more of a significant hearing loss. And it also depends on your ear canal as well, the type that you use, and your lifestyle. So there's things that in your hearing aids that you can have loop systems installed. So it has what we call a telecoil switch. It's got a T-switch, and it means that if there's a loop system in the room which cuts out excess noise, external noise, and they use them a lot in churches and theatres and places like that, you can switch your T-coil on and you can hear the person that's speaking because they're using a microphone that fits in with the loop system. So that pretty much talks about the loop systems and how they work. So loop systems is something that you can get installed. You've got different types. You've got room loop systems. You've got personal listeners, which are individual and go across different distances. So they're called assistive listening devices. So it's a portable device that you get a loop that you hang around your neck and somebody else uses a microphone. You can get ones that are a pen that sit in the middle of your desk, and they can be omnidirectional or bidirectional. You can change the direction of them. So there is such a lot of technology out there that you can use. There's speech-to-text apps. And one of the big things that COVID has really made a difference on is video conferencing. You know, look at us today. We're sitting here in a video conference and we have actually captions on the conference. So that really makes life accessible for people who are deaf or have hearing loss. And for everybody else as well, because if somebody's got a particularly thick accent or a Scottish accent like myself, you might not understand what I'm saying, and the captions can help with that conversation as well. Mainstream tech has a lot of inbuilt accessibility features. So look at mainstream tech and see what's there. And I think that is me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. And as it's 5 already, and you and Dave have been very comprehensive in both of your presentations. Actually, most of the questions we have already been covered, but I am going to ask a couple. And then just to let everyone know, I'll be sharing the slides, the recording, and any material that's been shared today, as well as signposting to websites that will provide further information following the webinar. So just a couple of questions. This one is aimed at you, Terry, and I know that we've touched on this already, but it's a good question and worth revisiting. How can we make workplaces more accessible for deaf people who use BSL as their first language in being able to get a job? I've been helping a customer who has been to various interviews and has BSL interpreters, etc. However, employers interview and score in the traditional way and do not offer work experience or see the true value of the candidate and give them an opportunity or a chance to have a go, even if they do offer a short-term contract.
So there's a few things you can do. So first thing is recruiters being deaf aware, understanding the differences with deaf people. Being aware of access to work support that employers can get. It's important that people understand access to work and that you can get funding to support staff in the workplace. And that communication support can be booked for interviews. Access to work will actually pay for communication support at interviews as well. So understanding how to use interpreters if you need that in an interview. Write your adverts in plain English. As I said, deaf people don't use jargon at all. It's very much, I'm trying to think of the expressions that we want to use. So it has to be plain English. Don't use a visual expression that, maybe not the right word I'm looking for. Just write it in plain English. Allow candidates to see the questions before the interview if possible. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time before the interview, but also give them time before the interview to work with interpreters so that they're understanding the question that you want to ask them.
Yeah.
So we, generally as an organisation, we will give them the questions the day before to give them time to actually look at the questions and think about them and understand what we're trying to ask them. Extend your interview time as well to allow for the interpreters, because it does take longer than having a hearing conversation, because the interpreter's got to translate what's been said and then translate back. So just allow a bit more time for that. And if you've got written exercises at all, please share the written exercises before and allow a bit extra time for them to write, because they struggle with the translation as well sometimes.
Great, thank you, Terry. Dave, a question for you. How do I ensure our adverts are fully accessible to people with sight loss?
So there are two aspects to this. One is obviously to make sure that somebody who has sight loss, who's reliant on screen reading software or screen magnification software, can actually perceive the content. So we go on the same websites as anyone else. We go on to Indeed or LinkedIn. So we're looking for jobs in all the usual places. If you put a picture of text, then that makes it harder for somebody using screen magnification or screen reading. So make sure you're using, properly well-structured text. Don't only rely on color for emphasis. Make sure the images are labeled and tables have proper headings. So that's the sort of the mechanical part of it, if you will. But then there's also signaling to potential candidates, something we touched on earlier. So make use of the RNIB Visibly Better scheme or disability confidence scheme, so that your organization becomes known as one that really genuinely does want to hear from candidates with sight loss. So make sure that that's obvious in the text of the advert and also on your organization's website.
Thank you, Dave. I am going to ask one more question, and I'll put it to both of you. And it's an interesting one. I apologise for putting you on the spot, but what do you feel are the pros and cons of artificial intelligence in inclusivity?
You want to go
Well,
first, Terry?
Yeah, okay. So artificial intelligence, it's very early days for the deaf community in terms of artificial intelligence. And one of the things we are looking at is how can we use it to translate websites and make websites accessible for sign language. As I said, there's a lot of developments going on, and we're looking at actually using it for our own website and doing a test for 6 months to see how popular it is and if people actually do like it. But as I said, it is the way forward, isn't it? About access and making sure that different things is accessible. So yeah, I think cons, I don't know any cons at the moment. It's just so early in the process.
Well, the con is that it's not intelligent. It certainly is artificial and it's not intelligent. That doesn't mean that it's not useful, though, because it is extremely useful, and lots of blind people are very interested in using AI to describe images. This is a very live topic in the blind community at the moment, about how we can use artificial intelligence to get really rich descriptions of images. But it's always better if the publisher of that image puts their own text description. Also, anyone who's used services like ChatGPT, you'll know it has moments of brilliance and moments where it's slightly less brilliant. So I think we do need to be aware that these things are evolving in front of us, and they do have accessibility applications in terms of I mean, Apple just this week actually talked about a feature that's going to make it easier to hear somebody on the other end of the phone. They're going to use AI to try and isolate your voice when you're in a busy place. Also, AI, I think, in the future will be used to kind of highlight the key information that you've told it that you're interested in. Maybe for somebody with a reading impairment who has a lot of content to read, you'll be able to use AI to ask questions. So you can already do things like give AI a restaurant menu and then say, just tell me about the vegetarian options, right? And an AI can do that. So incredible potential, risks, but the sector is collaborating, and I've been in meetings with Microsoft and Google, and they're talking about guardrails and safeguards to make sure that they do take some of those issues very seriously.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you again, Terry. And thank you for my wonderful colleagues for helping me facilitate this today. We'll be making a donation to both RNIB and RNID to thank you for your time and your input here. And as I said, we'll be sharing the slides, the recording, and signposting people to websites and such for further information. We will also, hopefully in the next few months, be running a similar webinar regarding neurodiversity. At the moment, we've got Ambitious About Autism have confirmed that they speak about the job seeker experience from an autistic point of view, and we're in talks with a couple of other charities. So please watch this space, and I hope you will all enjoy the rest of your weeks and weekends, and thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.